Good morning, gang. This is David Mixner. Given the recent COVID epidemic, and I'm a long-term COVID survivor, as I think they call them COVID long terms, especially when it comes to the issue of COVID fog. I've been haunted by it since last July. I thought it was much, much better after I got the two shots, my two vaccines. And then it's made somewhat of a moderate return, which is a little discouraging. But what it did do, as I had time to reflect, is get me thinking about my journey with mental illness, because I have had periods in my life that has been real struggles. And I think that our fear of discussing mental illness, especially personally, is that somehow it will hurt us, or shame, or others won't understand, which is all the more reason that people who have struggled with mental illness come out of the closet. And I guess that's what I'm sort of coming out of the closet today about. Our knowledge of the brain and the heart and what it does to feelings and emotions and depression and highs is still somewhat primitive. And we still have enormous research to do in order to help millions of people who struggle with this every day. I was born in 1946, and the concept of mental illness was not a good one. It was a dark shadow over me. At a very early age, I knew I was gay. I knew I was different, and amazingly, kids say anything, but I knew that I couldn't talk about it to any adult or anybody, as a matter of fact. And I was just terrified by these feelings I had. Now, at the time, it was not uncommon to hear of LGBTQ people being forced into mental institutions by their families and having electric shock treatment, or even worse, thousands and thousands of forced lobotomies to cure them of their homosexuality. So my concept of psychiatry at the time was that people like me would be forced into mental institutions and turned into basically vegetables mentally. So I had an early fear of anything relating to that. Now, that coupled with the fact that uh, we were separated from society by another very uh, tough set of circumstances that could lead to serious mental stress. From day one in our youth, we're taught that the worst thing you can do is lie. We send most elected officials to jail not for the crimes they've committed, but for perjury. We're told in childhood that George Washington couldn't chop the cherry tree down because he cannot tell a lie. Honest Abe, people who get awards for just truth telling, which should be an everyday normal aspect. But there was one exception to that. Every institution we had, our churches, our Grange halls, our labor halls, uh, educational institutions, said the worst thing you could do is be a liar, unless unless you were gay. And then they encouraged us to lie about our very being. Uh, do not tell us about it. And if you do, you'll be punished. You will be separated from families. You won't be allowed to run for office. You will not be allowed to even maybe stay with the families. Uh, it was enormous pressure for us to stay in the closet, to lie. And I think out of this comes what a friend of mine, Toy Osborne, called oppression sickness. And that is the pressure that we are put on to lie about who we are from a very early age does create a spiritual and mental illness. I know that as I started coming out sexually, everybody I met in a bar, I lied to. I made up names, I made up occupations, I made up addresses. I did everything I could so no one would know who I was. And I, when I would question that, I remember a time my father at the dinner table saying that a family son who had committed suicide because they were gay, and this was in the 50s, I remember him proclaiming to the whole family at the dinner table that that family was better off with that child dead than having to live with the shame of having a gay son. I got the message. I knew what that was, and so from a very early age, we're pushed dramatically into that closet, and the slightest hint of coming out of it meant punishment, perhaps commitment to a mental institution, inability to get a job, inability to enjoy the public accommodations as other people, to be put on the fringes of society. Even the American Medical Association declared gays to be deviants and abnormal, and it was a psychiatric condition that needed to be cured. And that didn't change until the middle of the 1970s. So I knew, and all through my younger years, quite honestly, suicide wasn't far from my front of my brain. From a very young age, I never really had the courage to kill myself, and that's really a fact. But I hoped that I would get a disease, that a tree would fall on me, that I would get caught up in a tractor or a columbine or something like that and be removed from this earth because I was so terrified of what awaited me. And it took many forms. My mental illness was to attempt to be better than any of the other kids, to be the best little boy in the world, to do anything I could to build up a love bank with my parents and my family, so that if anyone discovered, perhaps having banked all that goodness and pride in me, that I could call upon that and it would ameliorate the pain. I also went into great depressions. I remember at a young age in a heat wave, putting all sorts of blankets around me, and crawling underneath my bed, hoping that the heat would kill me. As I went on to go into my teens and low 20s, the lying became worse. I mean, we are professional liars in the gay community. We were taught to be good, not to get a hint of how to put people off our scent, of how to redirect their attention on us by clever and manipulative ways. And it's no wonder in depression sickness that people who come out of the closet late, and I didn't come out of the closet late until my 30-year birthday, that lying was encouraged on us. And there was a sickness to our lying, an attempt to again and again recreate who we were so we wouldn't be discovered, to never trust our friends with too much information, to make up female partners, to give elaborate details on dates that did not exist, or people who existed but just were friends and would tell other family and friends that we were more. And that certainly, even after I came out, was carried into my life, and it took me several years to throw off the yoke of this suppression sickness. I came out in 1976 because of Anita Bryant, and I had worked all my life up to that point, 20 years, for other people's rights and freedom. And I got to a point in my life and said, how can I put my life in danger for the civil rights movement or the anti-war movement and not fight for myself? But I knew if I fought in this movement, the LGBTQ plus freedom movement, I'd have to come out. And so I wrote a long letter to my parents As the first step, I was in California at the time because isn't that where all gays who were in the closet went, California or New York? And my parents took it badly. And it's a call that still is etched into my mind more than any of you can imagine, where they called me lower than a sewer rat, and that I was garbage, and that I was sewer, and that I had to stop it, and I was a disgusting human being doing those sexual practices. And basically told not to come home and told not to tell anyone else because they were terrified about it. Well, that was a little late because I already had sent out a letter, a fundraising letter, telling people I was gay and would they help us fight Anita Bryant. Only I would probably come out that way, raising money. And the reaction of my parents, plus others, I mean, I had Democratic candidates who I had donated to, who sent me back their checks that said, I can't be associated with you. Suddenly, I wasn't invited to the parties. I was excluded from so very much. Doesn't mean that they weren't really good, straight people. My sister and other friends who were there for me and stood by me, even though I didn't make it easy for them to do so. I was so angry. But most importantly, I realized that I was in the midst of a complete and total nervous breakdown from it all. Plus some other figures. I had suffered some brutality throughout my life and not dealt with it. So the combination of the past catching up with me and coming out and having such a hostile reception in 1973 put me into the throes of a technically complete nervous breakdown. I cried for 6 months. I was unable to function. I could not work. I went to the Hacker Clinic in Beverly Hills and almost got inpatient therapy. My sister helped hold me together, some other friends, but I lost a lot of friends who thought that I had gone Looney Tunes, as one of them said to me. I couldn't see any path out. I was working to survive, hanging on by my fingernails. Lost my apartment, was sleeping on some kind people's couches. It was a horrifying, lonely time. And ironically, it was, I went to this one event and I was standing by myself. No one was coming over because, I don't know, they're afraid of mentally ill people. That's why. There was not a moment of compassion. It was all fear. It was like the fear of coming out of the closet. People just couldn't deal with it. And over my shoulder, I heard a friend, or what I thought was a friend, say to a politician, you don't need to deal with David Mixner. He's crazy as a loon. He's done. And for some reason, that made me very angry. And I said to myself, you don't have the right to rule me out. And from that moment on, I fought to get back up on my feet. And through a painful process and apologizing to a lot of people and realizing that a lot of the things that had happened to me was not my fault. And I went on to obviously have an extraordinary career. But that wasn't the end of my struggle. Coming out of that, there was a lot of damage and a lot of repairs that had to be made. But just as I got my act together, like 1978, 79, and had integrated finally into the LGBTQ community and overcome my reputation as being Looney Tunes, AIDS hit. And it's a little bit, though much more stark, much more tough than the coronavirus. Not in numbers, but in the fact that everyone was acceptable to the coronavirus. It had no race, orientation, income level. It was a equal opportunity virus. AIDS, unfortunately, was the same thing, but it appeared first for the first years of AIDS as a gay disease. And once again, we were cut off. And what even more important, every week, someone who was a friend died. or got sick. And if they got sick, we all had to take turns visiting them in the hospital, walking their dogs. We learned to change uh, ports and IV tubes, how to take care of them if they were bedridden, uh, and provide them the emotional support to fight. And that was our lives for most of the 80s. And when we had any moments of excess of not taking care of our friends who were sick and dying, and in the end, I lost about 322 friends to AIDS. I kept a journal and I wrote down their names because I realized after the first 30, I was beginning to forget people. So I kept a journal, which is a Yale library now, of everyone who was a friend who died of AIDS, and it came to 322, and it's probably more because I think I did forget some. And that took an enormous stress on me. And two of my closest friends died, Peter Scott and David Quarles, and I just had to get out of town. I could not deal with it any longer. 10 years of this, one time after another. And others did, but I did not have the spiritual mental strength to do more than 10 years. I moved. I checked out of the activism. I got a job. I was living with a guy who we got along, nice guy, named Bradley. And I moved clear across country back to the East Coast, and took 2 years to heal. Now, I didn't have a complete and total nervous breakdown, but it was a time of great mental stress and therapy. And by that time, I had now realized that I had a long record of struggle with my mental health. And I had to deal with some beatings by the police and other places that left me scarred, literally physically scarred and mentally scarred for life, that I joined a PTS group. And I've been in and out of a PTS group all since the early 90s. And most of the people in my PTS groups were veterans who had had neurological disorders from Iraq or Afghanistan, or lost limbs in the fighting. And I was the only civilian in the group, and I was gay. And I said to my doctors, they got to be told that I'm gay before I go in this group. I can't deal with it if I'm going to have to tell them. And they were a little suspicious at first, but by the end of the first session, they realized I had every right to be in that group, and became very supportive, and actually in many ways changed a lot of their lives and outlooks on our struggle for freedom. So I've had a painful journey and struggle with my mental health. And it crops up every once in a while, but I have learned techniques to deal with it. One, I realized that it is reasonable, having lost 300 plus friends to AIDS, and the people I love the most, and been left insecure at times with my family. Not everybody in my family, but really strongly by my mother and father and aunts and uncles. That my journey had been rocky enough to legitimately have serious stress. Now, couple this with what I believe is a genetic mental deficiency, and I'm not sure, and doctors might disagree, but the more I read about it, everybody, almost everybody in my family dealt with severe anxiety attacks. Now, I'm sure everyone's had an anxiety attack. For me, I would go to bed and go to sleep. And maybe it's because of events in my past that were pretty horrible. Sleep soundly. And then, like someone hit me across the face, I'd sit up in the bed, and I was in such anxiety that the only way I could survive it without killing myself, and I'm dead serious about the degree of anxiety, was to walk until I was so tired that I couldn't drop at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, cities, country, didn't make any difference. Animals, robbers, I didn't care. I just walked and walked and walked until I was exhausted. I would take a Xanax and come back, and the combination of being exhausted from walking and the Xanax would bring me down. Um, but the exhaustion and the fear of them were unbelievable. Later on in life, about 2005, 2007, someone introduced me to Zoloft, which I take every day. And it was like a miracle drug. I haven't really had a panic attack since then, but they didn't exist earlier. My mother had them. I know my sister had them, maybe my brother. I haven't talked to him about it. But I know a lot of people in my family was haunted by it. So coupled with that, plus my journey with mental health, I felt at times very mentally fragile. But things have been good as I have aged, and I have had challenges. But the tools I use is how blessed I am, how many good things I have in my life, not in a Pollyanna way, but taking inventory, as I was taught in PTS, that my stress was legitimate, my anxiety was legitimate, either from a medical viewpoint or journey viewpoint, and that no matter how dark and rugged and the valley was that was filled with what seemed to be bloody rocks, every day has a moment of joy in it. And that what I had to focus on was not the bloody rocks, but finding that moment of joy so I didn't miss it. And guess what? Every day did have a moment of joy, and every day has tons of joy in some days, but at least I could find one moment. And when I'd get my head into a place that concerned me, I would look for those joys, moments of joys. I also realized that in order to help others, I had to help myself. And that meant not only seeking mental help or PTS groups, but it also meant taking vacations, turning the cell phone off, listening to beautiful music, reading great literature, being inspired by others. I can't tell you how many biographies I read of people and discovered that almost every single great person that I read about had moments in their life of great mental health crisis. So why am I telling you this? Well, I figured I had to come out of the closet to the depth of my journey. Many of you know parts of it. I also feel that with the COVID fog hitting, and my doctor estimates it could be up to 10 million people who could live with this fog for a period of time and maybe permanently. They just don't know. But it is paralyzing when it hits. And I've learned how to deal with it. On the days it hits, I just say, okay, I'm not going to do anything, sleep, watch television, watch porn, whatever works. And on the good days, I just pump stuff out like this blog to you today. So I can't tell you enough that we all, in some form, in some degree, struggle with our mental health. The stigma of that has not been erased yet. People still are afraid professionally to see therapists and be open about it, fearing that it will hurt their career. And I guess I just said 74 wanted to come out of the closet and give you the whole 9 yards of my journey with it, because I think I've ended up in a nice place. I'm very proud of it. And I'm very proud of, quite honestly, doing this video. So get help. Don't be afraid. Come out of the closet. Tell people of your struggle so we can be there for you. We know that there's still thousands of young LGBTQ people killing themselves because they think there's something wrong with them or no hope. And maybe if people in my position coming out of the closet on my struggles and how wonderful my life has been having walked through those fears, it will help a little bit. So I urge you to share, get help, and most importantly, just thanks for listening to all of this. I really appreciate it. Have a good week, folks.